There are 25 participants on the call, including you. You are joining your conference as a participant. For a menu of available commands, press *#. Your connection is now in listen-only mode.
Let's start from scratch. All right, let's go back to the last slide. All right, we really appreciate everyone on the webinar, especially those that are giving us a little bit more information about our technology and the feedback. So thank you. We're going to take it from the top. All right. Hello and welcome to the next installment of the Active Transportation Resource Center webinar series. My name is Victoria Custodio, and I'm a project coordinator at the ATRC, who is organized and will be facilitating this webinar today. As our announcement has described, today's webinar is titled Early Active Transportation Program Achievements, where we'll reflect on ATP outcomes and achievements from early funding rounds of the ATP program. And we're doing so with respect to the wide range of project types, costs, geographies, and priorities set by the initial ATP legislation. We think that this webinar is coming at an opportune time. As we know, the California Transportation Commission, along with Caltrans, will be releasing its next call for ATP projects in early 2018. So this is a great opportunity to hear about what was funded and completed during the earliest cycles of ATP, and hopefully gives you a lot of ideas about where you can go with new and future rounds of funding. Next slide, please. For those of you who aren't aware of the Caltrans Active Transportation Resource Center, we provide resources utilizing a combination of subject experts from Caltrans, as well as the California Department of Public Health, which is my agency, California State University at Sacramento, and various other non-infrastructure, safe routes to school, and infrastructure experts. Our ATRC exists to support the Caltrans Active Transportation Program, its awardees at the local and regional levels, as well as those that are looking to get started in tapping into these investments. We have just a few housekeeping reminders for you today. All of our audio will be through the phone, so hopefully you can hear us. This is the call information. All of our phones have been, the lines have been muted if you're for our participants. Our speakers will be unmuting themselves to allow for their presentations to occur. And then if you have difficulties, please click Contact Support link in the calendar invitation of this webinar. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and posted to the ATRC website, and that the address is caatpresources.org. And then lastly, we will be having a robust question and answer period. We are asking that you enter your questions through the chat feature in the webinar system, and we are going to have a longer question and answer period after all presentations have been completed. We do know that one of our speakers has another commitment, so he's going to have to excuse himself before our prolonged question and answer period ends, so we'll have just a few short minutes after his presentation to allow for questions, and that's Jaime. I'll get to that in just a bit. All right, let's do the next slide. All right. So we have a couple webinar objectives, learning objectives for those that are on the phone. The first is to, excuse me, recall 2 to 3 examples of activities and outcomes associated with different types of ATP awards. And then second is to be able to share 2 to 3 lessons learned from early ATP awarded projects. Okay, and finally, here's our list of speakers for today. Again, my name is Victoria Custodio, and I'm the facilitator from the Active Transportation Resource Center. We'll have our first program focused by Jaime Espinosa, who's our Senior Transportation Engineer at Caltrans Active Transportation Program. He's going to be providing a brief summary on ATP performance outlook and outcomes from cycles 1 and 2. He'll be followed by Mark Mattox, who is the Public Works Director in the town of Paradise. And he'll be telling the story of infrastructure plus non-infrastructure equals success beyond infrastructure in Paradise. Mark will be followed by Stephen Patchon, and he's the ATP Program Manager at the Southern California Association of Governments, and his presentation is entitled Go Human Pop-Ups, Strategies to Augment Active Transportation Projects and Strengthen ATP Applications. And our last presentation will be by Justin Robertson, who's a planning associate at the City of Glendale, and his presentation is entitled Be Street Smart Glendale. Excuse me, sorry about that. All right. Since our agenda is pretty packed, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Jaime. If you can let us know that you're ready to go. And we'll just, remember you're going to need to unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone. And just give us a heads up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
You can, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jaime Espinosa. I work with the Active Transportation Program office here in Caltrans. My primary focus for the program is to look at performance and outcomes and track actions taken by CTC and just to see the overall health of the program. And I'm also involved with the progress and final reporting requirements for the program. So that's my focus for the program, and with that, we'll get started. Next slide, please. So just some background, program background information. Some of you may know this already. For some of you, it might be the first time you see it. The ATP program began with the passage of Senate Bill 99 and AB 101, and it came online in September 2013. With the law, the change in the law, it came funding in approximately $120 million per fiscal year. And as you know, each cycle has different fiscal years included with them. With the passage of SB 1 recently, that added an additional $100 million per year, and that's available starting in fiscal year 17-18. So just a quick breakdown on what our cycles look like. Cycle 1 had 3 years of funding, however, it only had 2 years of programming. And the programming years are 14-15 and 15-16 as seen there. This cycle had 276 projects. However, that was a result of over 770 applications submitted. The average cost per project was $1.3 million for cycle 1. Moving over to cycle 2, cycle 2 had 3 years of funding, and it was a 3-year programming period. This cycle, we received 617 applications, and 207 were selected to be part of cycle 2. The average cost per project went up slightly to $1.7 million. In cycle 3, we saw 2 years of funding in a 2-year programming period, and 122 projects were selected. And again, the average cost per project went up, and this time just slightly over $2 million per project. As you know, cycle 3A is currently being voted on. The state, small, urban, and rural have already been voted on. The MPO and RTPA selection is happening in December, with a few, I believe, happening in January CTC meeting. But Cycle 3A provides 2 years of funding, but it's going to overlap with Cycle 3, so it's going to essentially be a 4-year programming period, with the first 2 fiscal years having SB1 dollars, and the second 2 fiscal years having the state highway account and the federal dollars provided to it. Our future cycle, which was mentioned earlier in the presentation, is going to be providing 4 years of funding in the 4-year programming period. This brings some relief to the program because most of our projects typically take about 3 to 4 years to get through the cycle. Next slide, please. So just a bit on our project structure. The ATP project life cycle, we see a lot of various projects. Some are small, some are medium, and a few are large, and a very small percentage are very large. But typically, we see projects come in with 4 development phases, and that is project approval and environmental document, plan specs and estimates, right-of-way, and CON. Now, what you don't see on this slide is CON and I, or plans, but those 2 components fall under CON. We lump them all into CON. So if you want to make a note there, if you're printing these out, that should say CON and I and plans as well. But a project's full development cycle typically takes 3 to 4 years to reach construction. And you'll see here on the graphic, for PNED, we typically see projects take 3 to 12 months to get through that process, and it all depends on their complexity. For the environmental document and project approval, if you're near waterways or in sensitive environmental areas, it may require additional time to get through that. On the plan specs and estimates, we typically see projects take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Again, these are just averages. Some projects take significantly more time due to their having extensive limits or numerous bridges or pedestrian crossings that need to be designed and planned for. And then moving on to right-of-way. Right-of-way, we typically see most of these projects don't require a lot of right-of-way, but the ones that do typically take 6 to 12 months to get through that process. Now, keep in mind for right-of-way, if you have heavy utility involvement or free acquisition or railroad involvement, you're looking at 12 plus months, more likely closer to 18 to 20 months to get through that process. So it could add some delay to your project if not planned accordingly. Now, you will see from the graphic that the first three boxes have an overlapping period, and that's to signify that there is some concurrent work that can happen during that period. But the last one, the last box, construction, that's a freestanding item. There are some nuances where you could start or you could do some right-of-way concurrently through CON, but typically, and for the vast majority of our projects, all of the previous 3 pre-CON phases are complete, and the agency comes in for their construction allocation. Now, what we've been seeing as a trend is most contracts get awarded anywhere between 4 to 6 months from the time of CON allocation. There are some that take a little longer, and for those there is a time extension request that will need to be submitted. But for the most part, most get awarded within 6 months. And given the size of our ATP projects, most of them are completed well within the 36-month period. However, if you have a project that is extremely large or has a lot of complex features, at the time of CON allocation, you could request additional time beyond the 36 months. Next slide, please. So now that we have a little bit of a background and how what kind of time periods we have for the projects, we can start looking at performance. Now, measuring our program performance, there's 2 ways to really track it. One is one that gives immediate feedback is looking at the allocation rates. for all of the projects programmed by cycle. This requires tracking all the actions taken by the CTC. This includes allocations, advancements, time extensions, any technical adjustments that were made. So we track all of that by the action taken record posted by the CTC. And that gives us immediate feedback, and we'll go over those results here shortly. But the other method is looking at the before and after comparisons of ATP features, that is the program outcomes. This is where we compare what was out there before the project came in and what was put in afterwards. So this gives us a good indication of how the money is being used, how many amenities we're actually getting for our money, for our program dollars. But this does require a lot of data collection, both before and after the project is complete. And we do have to compare the data, and a lot of that data is still forthcoming because a lot of projects are in various phases of delivery. So until the final reports come in, we won't have a very clear picture of all of the amenities. But we do have a general idea, which I'll get into in the next couple slides. Next slide, please. So going back to measuring our program performance, under number 1, we talked about tracking delivery rates. Well, this is our our performance for cycle 1. You'll know this is for fiscal year 14-15 and 15-16. So this is cycle 1. For cycle 1, we're currently delivering at an 88% allocation rate. And you'll wonder, well, why is this program or why is this cycle still open? Well, we have some projects that have received time extensions. And that's primarily indicated by that red section there of the pie chart. We expect all time extensions all projects that receive time extensions to come in for their actions by February 28th of next year. So by that point, we will have a good indication of our delivery rate for cycle 1. If all projects that receive time extensions come in and receive their allocation, we have a projected allocation rate of 98% for cycle 1. Next slide, please. So this next slide, this slide here provides an indication of what we anticipate cycle 1 to produce if it was all delivered and complete. So you see here, I'm not going to go through each box, but it's fairly easy to follow. But for bike lanes, we expect 115 miles of Class 1 to be added to the system, 260 miles of Class 2, 75 miles of Class 3. And moving onward to sidewalks, you'll see we expect 85 miles of less than or equal to 8 feet wide sidewalks. We also have our non-infrastructure educational programs. Now, this is a very macro view of the NI and plans, but it does tell you what we could expect or what we should expect from this program, and that is the equivalent of 270 staffing positions for various programs. Close to 40,000 articles or equipment to hand out, and that includes bikes, ped counters, bike maintenance tools, helmets, pedometers, etc. And you'll see the outreach number in the plans provided by the program for cycle 1. Next slide, please. Moving on to cycle 2, this is good for this data here is shown is for fiscal year 16-17. However, we are currently in 17-18 as well. We do have the most current pie chart available, but it wouldn't coincide with the data presented for cycle 1. So I chose to keep this here. But this gives you a good indication. We are currently at 83% allocated for fiscal year 16-17, and that's a significant jump from where we were at this point with cycle 1 in the first fiscal year. So the program itself is advancing nicely. For this program, for this cycle and this fiscal year, we had 154 projects with 216 phases for this fiscal year. And there's the phase breakdown on the left. You'll see 183 have already allocated, 33 are unallocated, and 29 projects remain to allocate their phases. Some of the unallocated phases do include some lapsing. The projects are still active. They just lapsed a few of their phases. Next slide, please. For Cycle 2, just like we went over for Cycle 1, if Cycle 2 delivers all of their projects and amenities as proposed, this is what we can expect from Cycle 2. 85 miles of Class 1 added to the system, 15 miles of Class 3, some sidewalk additions, 80 miles for up to 8 feet and greater than 8 feet. We have 20 miles of those, 500 new crosswalks, and on the non-infrastructure, you'll see the numbers there. We have an equivalent of 114 staffing positions funded with almost 56 or 57,000 pieces of equipment to hand out. Next slide, please. So just looking, quick look at the program at its outlook. With the infusion of SB1 funding, the program's funding has nearly doubled, and despite all the challenges of launching a new program, the allocation rates for the first and the most challenging cycle are currently at 88 and anticipated to reach 98 by the end of next February. The first year of Cycle 2 is delivering at a higher rate than the first year of Cycle 1. You'll see the numbers there. And the future cycle will include a 4-year programming window that will more closely match the typical life cycle for ATP projects as shown in previous slides. Our future cycles, one that's currently coming online here is Cycle 3. It has 2 years of programming. Cycle 3 augmentation, we went over, has 4 years, and Cycle 4 will have 4 program years as well, and we expect all future cycles to have 4 programming years from here on out. So that will provide some relief in trying to get these projects into the programming years and programmed appropriately to reduce the need for time extensions. Next slide, please. A couple of quick changes that we've made if we go back to how we measure performance, we talked about checking the allocation rate. Well, the other was looking at the before and after comparisons. And here, this is how we gather that information. So starting in Cycle 3, the ATP application was modified to request this information up front. It's a similar data we mined from Cycles 1 and 2, but those had to be done manually and is very time consuming. The categories that we're looking at are bicycle improvements, pedestrian improvements, multi-use trail improvements, and vehicular and roadway traffic calming improvements. Those 4 categories are shown in the graphic there and are part of the application. Next slide, please. So once we start collecting that data, and that data is going to come to us through progress reports and final reports. At least the final data will. The initial data will come through the application itself. We'll be able to compare before and after improvements, and we'll be able to get a good picture, not just of individual projects, but of the program as a whole, as to how closely they're delivering towards what the performance charts showed they would. So that's our plan for the infrastructure. The next slide, please. This next slide shows the roll-ups for the non-infrastructure. And with the same thing here, we will be getting progress and final reports for these. Some of the agencies have already submitted these to us or started to submit these to us, so thank you very much for those. And that's going to help in helping us determine the health of the program and how many amenities and how much services and assistance we're providing out there to the local agencies. And with that concludes our performance and outcomes presentation. If you have any questions, please submit them per the instructions through the chat. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jaime. That was a wonderful presentation and a great overview of what's been achieved from the early and programmed from the early cycles. Jaime needs to take off for another appointment. We're really grateful that he was on the webinar with us today. Jaime, if you have time for one question, we'd like to give
Sure.
this right now. This is a question that's come in about, and it's asking, to what do you attribute the rise in project allocation between cycles 1 and 2?
Well, I think the agencies involved are more familiar with the program now. It's a higher profile program than originally thought, so there's a lot more attention given to it. So I think people are aware and they know the money is there to help fund these projects, so they're just coming after it a bit quicker.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're going to hold off on other questions at this time so that we can get to our next speakers. Thank you, Jaime, for joining us. And up next, we have Mark Maddox from the town of Paradise. Mark?
Yes. Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, yes, my name is Mark Maddox. I'm the Public Works Director for the town of Paradise. And today, my portion of the webinar will focus on the combined infrastructure and non-infrastructure efforts we've completed under 2 Cycle 1 ATP projects. Next slide, please. The town of Paradise is located in Northern California, about 80 miles north of Sacramento, and a short 8-mile drive east of Chico in Butte County. Next slide. We are a relatively new town, incorporated in 1979, and we have a population of about 26,000 people and 100 center lane miles. Our MPO is Butte County Association of Governments, and we qualify under the small urban and rural umbrella. Pretty much I can summarize the pre-incorporation development for the town of Paradise did not focus on providing facilities for non-motorized transportation. We have a lot of narrow roadways with open ditches and kind of more now of an urban setting with those infrastructure in place. So again, we have a small town budget with large city infrastructure needs just like everyone else. Next slide, please. Here is a list. Thankfully, the active transportation program has been an outstanding opportunity for the town of Paradise to secure additional funds to complete otherwise impossible projects for us. Here, our total award list is almost $15 million by the time 2019 is over. And to put that into perspective, that'd be about 15 to 17 years of annual revenue that the whole Public Works Department here receives to complete all of our functions, including staffing and road maintenance, signals, and everything else we do. So we're very grateful and thankful to be moving these projects forward. Next slide. And I think the ATP program, fortunately for us, has been able to recognize the need here. This is a similar kind of typical project area for us. This is in front of our Ponderosa Elementary School. And I think that our project applications somehow have been able to set ourselves apart from the hundreds of unfunded applications because of our ability to communicate the need through photos and in our narratives as well for the project need. Showing that they're good investments and also ones that will transform our community for decades to come. This is Pence Road again, and it only has about 20 feet in some of its areas and no sidewalks or bike lanes at all. But you can go to the next slide. You can see about twice a day it transforms to a complete nightmare where we have long queuing traffic showing a complete modal shift is needed for the elementary school. Again, this picture is really incredible that we were able to capture this. It's almost too good to be not staged, but I promise everyone that this was not a staged photo. We've got kids almost walking in the ditch, a gentleman riding a combo bike with a trailer, and then a gal holding a baby between, moving traffic and her parked truck. So I honestly don't think this picture could have been more compelling, and I think that's what's enabled us to compete on a larger scale as the town of Paradise and 26,000 people. So next slide. Here's another prime example of typical conditions in Paradise where even our marked crosswalks lead to dangerous fall hazards. And fortunately, again, this project was awarded under Cycle 2. Next slide. Our Almond Street Multimodal Improvements Project is a long overdue capital project awarded in Cycle 2 also, and this effort will transform our historical downtown, and we kind of call it a downtown now, but it is a downtown, and it certainly will be once this project is done, that we can provide safe sidewalks, bike lanes, and mixed-use paths in an underserved area, which is home to many, many critical community services. Next slide. And finally, thanks to SB1 augmentation in Cycle 3, our gap closure complex was awarded, and this effort will tie into the previous project along multiple roads, completing the vision for a new downtown and we'll finally have a network of infrastructure for sidewalks and bike lanes to build outward from. Next slide. But for the purposes of this presentation, my focus will be relating to our first two awards, the Pearson Road Safe Routes to School project and our Maxwell Drive project, totaling $2 million at 100% reimbursement. The purpose of the ATP program, of course, we are all very familiar with the goals, and I think it's important to look back at what we're trying to achieve as far as what the program was, its purpose. And so it's clear to me that these goals were established to create change on a local level in each of these areas rather than simply building infrastructure and expecting success to follow automatically. Next slide. Our first project on Pearson Road parallels 11,000 ADT corridor connecting 3 public schools to our 5-mile Class 1 trailway, which spans the entire length of our incorporated limits. Next slide. And here's a map view, of our project area and scope. Again, our primary focus in our application was really communicating to the scorers that this project will literally serve an entire quadrant of our town and a huge portion of our students going to these schools. Next slide. And again, photographing the project need is huge. This picture was particularly hard for me to take. I remember the moment I took it that it was going to help us communicate the need for infrastructure here, just because the danger this student was putting herself in without a second thought, just casually walking along the side of the road with that truck driving by, really spoke to us and to our council and made it a priority to submit under the Cycle 1. And again, with ATP, this would not be a reality. And so the next slide has a photo of the after condition. Now, thanks to ATP, we have a separated sidewalk with bike lanes, and we did incorporate the road diet. So we have now on our third busiest road represents the perfect example of what ATP should look like in the completed form. Next slide. Another quick before picture, and then we could go to the next slide for an after, and then go again to the next slide. The benefits of ATP also spread across helping create economic assets for our project as we span the frontage of chronically vacant commercial buildings, and you can go to the after. And this, about 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks after the project was completed, we had learned that the building had been purchased with a new restaurant and a new business because we believe the sidewalks help create an inviting atmosphere for both the business community and our residents using the facilities. Next slide. Second, I'd like to highlight our Maxwell Drive Safe Routes to School project. Similar to the photo I showed earlier of the traffic jam on Pence Road, this project is directly in front of Paradise High School. And I often can't help myself from cringing calling it a Safe Routes to School project when really Paradise seems to have so many safe routes issues at our schools, which we host. And so this project really aimed to add sidewalks and bike lanes directly in front of the high school, thankfully. Next slide. Here's another map of our project area, which shows that our proposed improvements also interact with a 5-mile trailway as well. Next slide. Again, some before and after photos. This one is of our pre-construction condition where we have a wider pavement width without a really good allocation of how that pavement's to be used, and it was really creating an environment that was conducive for motorists speeding and unsafe pedestrian crossings. Next slide. And then on completion, we are proud to offer a complete street feel with bike lanes and sidewalks. And this project was particularly unique because we were able to leverage a local sales tax initiative, which was for police, fire, and roads. But our portion of the roadway allocation we combined into our ATP project as non-ATP participating costs to be able to do some road rehab that was needed at the same time. And so it was really one of our most proud achievements to date as far as improving the conditions for Paradise High School. Next slide. And some more before and after pictures, before and after. Now we have a ADA compliant year-round facility. Another before and after picture. This one's kind of on the northern side of the corridor that was improved, which required bicyclists to ride in kind of a Class 3 route feel, but after construction, we have a dedicated bike lane that's being regularly used by students and recreational riders as well. Next slide. So with the infrastructure portion of the work done, I think it's important to look back and see how we did when it comes to achieving our program goals. And upon review, I would assess that we've only made progress on half of the ATP goals and objectives. I don't think we can truly state that we've increased the trips or our GHG levels decreased. Has public health actually improved? And I think these questions remain unanswered in the absence of a comprehensive non-infrastructure effort. Next slide. So how do we do that? I think there's many ways to say the same thing, 3 E's, 5 E's, 10 E's, whichever you want to call it. We need to engage children and adults in separate and meaningful ways. Next slide. So to help us accomplish these goals, we created a unique but not revolutionary partnership that brought together the Center for Healthy Communities at CSU Chico, Chico Velo, a local bicycle advocacy group, and Paradise Police Department. Through planned and coordinated efforts, we aimed to reach all students at the 4 impacted schools and reach out to our general public at large. Next slide. And breaking down the adult engagement campaign, we had 3 separate efforts there through media releases, media campaign, enforcement campaign, and working through school resources as well. Next slide. As far as our media campaign, really our community, and I think feel-good projects like these are really welcome change of pace as far as the local news goes. And so our local media picked on these and really did the hard work for us in getting our message out. And we were able to get these headlines through construction and incorporate Safe Routes to School messaging and ATP messaging throughout the project. Next slide. Even for our Walk and Bike to School Day, our local paper ran this story, which provided an easy opportunity to report on the progress of our efforts and engage parents and adults of the expectations in school zones. Next slide. We also utilize Facebook to help us disseminate critical information in emergencies and regular updates throughout the community, but through construction we're able to use Facebook as well to provide updates on project progress. And for this post we showed a monolithic pour of the sidewalk, curb, and gutter in a quick time-lapse clip that engaged over thousands of accounts, which was great to kind of do that in a fun way and get our community excited about the project nearing completion. Next slide. We also utilized pre-existing communication routes through the schools, allowing us to provide a program of safety messages embedded in their newsletters and email contacts to each parent. This was helpful to ensure our messaging reached our target audiences. Next slide. Lastly, and what could be more engaging than an enforcement campaign, well, this one was well received by the community, but not so much by the offenders. We actually heard a lot of people, they want enforcement in the school zones, and then when they get pulled over there, they say, hey, don't you guys have something better to do with your time than pull people over for speeding? But I think as a whole, this was one of the most useful tools and visible ways that our department was able to communicate about the new improved project areas. In fact, this was picked up by local news outlets and were able to deploy additional resources in the school zones. And in the process, the officers' enforcement actions ranged from simple warnings to arrests for outstanding warrants. So really checks a lot of boxes as far as community importance there. Next slide is a photo of another traffic stop in front of Paradise Elementary School. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. The other half of the equation is, of course, engaging the students to correctly address safety issues while promoting a generational shift in active transportation. We simplified our efforts to in-class presentations, bike rodeos, and school-wide events. Next slide. And for each class, we had a public health professional and a police officer present their perspective towards active transportation while facilitating fun educational activities. Next slide. And here's a photo of one of our bike rodeos where we had Chico Velo facilitate bicycling drills and providing safety tips. And in fact, we were shocked at how many children they were actually able to teach to ride a bike for the very first time, which was really rewarding to see happen out there, because that wouldn't happen without this grant. Next slide. And for the older grades, a tech class was learning, I believe, Adobe Spark or Adobe Photoshop, and they had a mini public service announcement contest for writing and walking. And so we saw some interesting pieces of work, but one of my personal favorites was walking is healthy, it keeps you fit. So walk, make sure you watch where you're going, and remember, don't get run over. It was kind of a fun to see what the kids came up with using their existing kind of class skills and modifying it for the bike encouragement and educational activities. Next slide. And of course, our lower grades also had a contest too, and this was one of the 4th grade class pictures as well. Next slide. We had a traditional walk and ride to school day event that included meetup points for those that could not walk or ride all the way from home. We're pretty spread out community, so we had meetup points, and this picture was taken from our community park about 1.5 miles or about a mile from Paradise Elementary School. Next slide. And a quick photo from our walk to school day in action. And then the next slide has a picture from our school-wide pep rally at the intermediate school, where Chico Velo, Paradise Police, and school administrators were able to distribute critical safety messages and have fun at the same time. We had a slow speed skills competition on bikes, which included participants from each grade or each class, and had teachers and administration staff as well kind of get on the bikes for fun. So to close my presentation on the next slide, I think it's worthwhile to take a step back and recognize how ATP has really set the standard for comprehensive grant programs. Through our I+NI projects, we have built the infrastructure and actively reached both children and adults. Next slide. Also, I would say from an economic perspective, and excluding the infrastructure itself that's built to last for decades, the $2 million is a great investment because nearly 100% of it went back to our community as we procured experts, specialists, engineers, and contractors to execute all of the worthwhile efforts. Next slide. Finally, I'd like to just flat out thank everyone involved in developing the ATP, supporting the ATP, and implementing ATP. This program has enabled projects that simply just could not have been constructed otherwise. It fills a direct and urgent need to achieve program goals in a meaningful way, and I believe the support and assistance throughout the program development has helped communities of all sizes compete and be successful in completing critical projects. And then my last slide, I was asked to provide some advice kind of for Cycle 4. Just my opinion, I have not served as a scorer, but what I think has been helpful for us is being able to complete our public outreach outside of the active call for projects. It seems like it's a more genuine approach to do that in advance, as well as have it be a more comprehensive effort as well. And let your community guide the project and the project priority. Submit applications and responses in the applications that are directly catered to the instructions and the guidelines, of course. And again, I'll touch on the photos. Photos that speak for themselves, I think providing a real-life view of the everyday hazards of the no project condition help make the scorer's job easier, rather than building something up that may not be easily understood in your narratives. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time on this afternoon, and the Active Transportation Resource Center for allowing the Town of Paradise to share our experience in completing 2 major milestones in our community. So thank you, and I'll stay on the line for the webinar, or for the Q&A session.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. That was a fabulous presentation. And yes, Mark will be joining us for a question and answer session following all the presentations. In the interest of time, we're going to move forward with our next presenter, and that's Stephen Patchon. So Stephen, can you just give us a quick audio check? You might need to unmute yourself by pressing *6, Stephen. Stephen, we can't hear you, so if you're...
Yeah, hey, sorry. Can you hear me now?
hear you now. Thanks so much. Take it away.
Instead of *6, I was hitting #6. I'm so used to Twitter. Hashtagging. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the Health Department and letting us present on Go Human. My name is Stephen Patchen. I'm with the Southern California Association of Governments. I'm the program manager for our Go Human pop-up tactical urbanism events. I'm also the project program manager for our regional ATP program. So there's a bit of a nexus between those two projects, and I'll kind of outline that as we move ahead. But I want to give you a sense of what the Go Human events do, the benefits, how they tie into ATP, and hopefully you can grab some ideas and implement these events in your communities, and we think they're a great benefit to the ATP project development and application process. Next slide, please. So the goals in general are of Go Human are to, in terms of or regarding ATP, is to help communities really push the envelope as far as project design and concepts. And when I say projects, I'm referring mostly to infrastructure projects, but it can also pertain to non-infrastructure. But for most of my presentation, when I refer to projects, I'm really speaking to construction projects and infrastructure projects. So the Go Human events are, we believe, are really beneficial in, as I said, pushing the design of these types of projects. So if you go back, remember in Jaime's update, there was one slide that showed the type of projects that are being implemented through ATP Cycle 2, and a lot of it was Class 1s, which are great projects, and Class 2s, which can be really great. But Class 4s are 0, and you know, that's something that Class 4s as protected bike lanes. They offer low stress infrastructure that is really important for, you know, from SCAG's purview, for us to meet our air quality impact goals. To get more people biking, we need those low-stress corridors, and something that Go Human, we hope is a tool, a trigger for these communities to start introducing those ideas into their communities. So pushing the envelope with design, and as you push the envelope with design, you really need that community support to back that type of design in some cases. And what Go Human does is allows us to capture as large and diverse of a group of constituents as possible. And that's really important because these projects, you know, you receive award for ATP, and sometimes the funding doesn't come until a few years downstream. And there may be a council turnover, there may be your engineer leaves, that sort of thing. We want to make sure that a project is embedded into the community and it doesn't bounce back to the state. You know, if the city doesn't want it anymore, you know, we don't want this cycle track, it doesn't work for us. We want to guard against that. So what we try to do is we focus on the casual civic participant. You know, we want to get outside of the planning meetings, outside of the charrettes, and get into the street festivals and get into those areas where folks are with their family. They're not thinking about planning or engineering, but we present it in a way at these festivals where the entry point is very accessible for them to learn about the benefits and the concepts that we're showcasing. So the campaign objectives, these are more about Go Human in general. just a quick aside, Go Human also includes, in addition to pop-ups, we have an advertising campaign, and we also develop toolkits for elected officials and community champions. So these campaign objectives are some higher level objectives that pertain to each one of those components of Go Human, and they're relevant for each one of those components of the campaign and for active transportation strategies in general. Next slide, please. So these next slides are going to be a bunch of slides that show what these events look like in the field or on the day of the festival, and to talk through some of the engagement strategies and how the cities have used these events to springboard into the ATP cycle, or maybe they're already receiving the ATP, and this is a way for them to preview the infrastructure that's coming with the community to, for one last public engagement opportunity to say, look, this is coming. If there's some tweaks here and there, this is your opportunity to give that feedback. But the events are really, it's a lab for these ideas. Cities like to test these ideas where there's an opportunity, especially before the ATP application period. If it's easily a class 2 can go in this on a corridor, but it's a multi-lane arterial and the speeds may be a little too fast, and a protected infrastructure could be more beneficial to cyclists, could improve safety, but maybe there's a road diet that needs to occur, then that's an opportunity for us to go in and do maybe a 4-to-3 conversion or a 5-to-3 conversion, and test that on that corridor so folks can have a chance to experience it. The engineer can be out on the day of the event and see how traffic performs. It's a way for those concepts to be tangible to city residents and stakeholders as opposed to being a 2D concept on a photo. It's also a way for folks who don't use the proposed infrastructure or the potential infrastructure to see how the street works, and that's primarily from the driver, and those are the drivers who go through. We tend to keep the streets open because a closed street would sabotage the effect of how the potential infrastructure would work. So we keep the street open. So motorists coming through, they get the feel of the street as well. They get the feel of the lower speeds, and so they get a chance to feel as well, and we try to capture that experience as well. So they may not be actively participating, more of a passive participation, but their feedback and comments are just as vital as those riding on the bike or walking along the sidewalk. Next slide, please. Here are two pictures. On the left, that was an event we did in Palm Desert a few years ago. On the right, that's an event we did this previous summer in the city of Riverside. Both of these projects were being considered by the city, and they used the Go Human event to refine their designs and gather additional data and qualitative input from residents to finalize their design and move ahead in their funding pursuits. Next slide, please. Both of these pictures are from the city of Westminster in the county of Orange, and these, again, were concepts that the city engineers were considering. They wanted to put this out on the street. The picture on the left, that was, I think it was a 4 or 5 lane corridor that the ADT was, I believe, lower than 20,000, and so the speeds were, really, really high, and it was just had the makings for new road configurations. This is also a good opportunity to start to discuss how these projects are marketed in the public engagement period. Calling these projects road diets when you're going to a 4 to 3 to 5 to 3 is something that we really highly recommend you do not, or you consider not doing. Road diets are becoming more and more of a negative connotation to community groups and engineers because of congestion concerns. And in a lot of these circumstances with these projects, the capacity of the roadway can be increased. So to refer to it as a road diet when you're increasing capacity, it's an awkward way to market it, and when you're actually, you're not dieting, you're actually consuming more of capacity. So it's a way to talk to the engineers and talk to the community about how to market this. How's the best way to show that you may be increasing capacity, reducing air quality impacts, and augmenting safety for, on the left, that dad has his family and his kids biking, and that's the kind of picture that Go Human really wants to see as we move forward through ATP. That the families, the families feel safe enough to bike on these. On the right picture with the roundabout, roundabouts are really tricky. I think the book is still out on how roundabouts really work for active transportation. Day of events, there's a bit of a learning curve with roundabouts, and when we put those in on the day of the event, it usually takes a morning for people to figure out how to maneuver them, no matter how much sign and information we have. And again, then the bottom line is we're still not quite sure how they perform better for cyclists. It's a project by project basis, but overall, I think the book is still out on these. Next slide, please. Another thing we try to incorporate into these events, you'll see it on the next couple of slides, is public art. These events there's a couple of metrics that we define success by these, and I'll get into that in the next couple of slides. But one of the metrics is, how big is the event? How many people are coming? And public art is a great way to get people out and to keep them there. As the aesthetics are really important to make sure folks come and they stay engaged and they feel like they're in a highly spirited, entertaining area. Another note for these two photos, and I think these are both in the city of Cudahy in the county of Los Angeles. These are really inexpensive materials. The photo on the left, that's just a roll of tar paper that has some paint on it, and we apply the designs before the event. Day of the event, we just roll it out and adhere the tar paper to the street by some electrical tape or some strongly adhesive tape. On the right, we've constructed a temporary pedestrian bulb out, and to the footprint of that bulb out, that was I think we just mixed some cornstarch and some yellow dye together to make a temporary paint that was easily removed. The outline of barriers with masking tape. The trees were donated the plants were donated by a local nursery. So really inexpensive things that look great the day of and can be easily moved in, moved out, and have just a great visual, and the optics are great. Next slide. One other important piece of this, and it ties in with the programming and pulling people to the event, is the placemaking of the event. We want to make sure that folks aren't just walking down an empty a corridor. The corridor may have a bunch of programming as far as tents and engagement areas for local community partners and food trucks and that sort of thing. But we really want to have like a passive sort of just respite sort of area or some, like on the picture of the right, with those are the mariachi band is sitting on some furniture that we had custom made. So the furniture, also on the left, that table with the people are playing the cards on, that was a table that we had custom made. And those are tables that we take to all of the events, and they provide a branding, some branding. People know that they're at a Go Human event when they see these types of furniture, these pieces of furniture. But so they offer an area for folks just to sit down, converse, talk to neighbors, talk about what they're seeing. It's an opportunity for us to also engage them where they're just, just hanging out. It's something where it's a very very easy, comfortable area. Try to provide as much shading as possible, and the entertainment sort of just shows up if there's buskers around or folks just entertaining each other. So I think we bounced back a slide. If you can go forward to the next slide. And then having the elected officials out. This is a great way for the elected officials to come out to support the event, to show how much the project has support by the elected officials and by community partners, and to move the project forward, either if it's already received funding, it's going to be billed first, or to commence the grant solicitation process. Next slide, please. And so finally, the successful projects, it comes in many forms, and the metrics are defined by each city. Each city, we go into a city basically with a blank canvas. We have a baseline project that we can do for any city, but we challenge the city to bring as much resources that they can to the plate or to the table to really have the project flourish and to pull as many folks into the event that we can educate and engage as possible. So some of the metrics for this successful project is if we can mature that project design from something that's a little less intrusive, that's more catalytic. So if it goes from a class 1 to a class 4, to us that's something where we're really pushing the boundary and getting these types of projects in that are showing that the city is prioritizing active transportation to that degree. We really want to get the robust engagement going. So the more people we talk to, the surveys, the quantitative and the qualitative surveys, and after we engage people with those surveys, we do the analysis of the surveys and feed that back to the city so the city can get some guidance on what to do next and next steps. But also that engagement is a way for us to educate city residents and stakeholders, and hopefully create some new champions for active transportation so they can keep pushing the envelope for future projects. And then just building support for these projects, as I mentioned before at the beginning of the presentation. We want to make sure that at the genesis of this project and through its development, that it continues to build support. And for this Go Human event, it can come in basically at any stage of that event and help to build that support and ensure the success of that project through the funding process into the construction and throughout the lifespan of the project. So next slide, please. Then finally, just some of the engagement strategies that we've incorporated. The left two slides, what we like to do is we like to put those A-frames, those wooden A-frames, and populate that with information and engagement opportunities with the event attendees, and station those with city staff, city engineers, planners, elected officials, some of our Go Human staff, and capture people as they walk by and talk to them. And a lot of the conversations really start with, I have no idea what you guys are doing, tell me what you're doing. And that's a really great sort of start to a conversation, because that's something at the door for us to educate them about the projects and concepts and start to build that support. On the right, that's what we call our feedback wall, and you can tell by the scale of that it's really popular with kids, and they just write down their ideas and they slap the ideas on a sticky and onto the wall, and we then process all that information and bounce that back to the cities for them to use with their project development. Next slide, please. And just really quickly, this is one of our earlier projects that had received ATP Cycle 1 funding and has been finished. This was in El Centro, and I believe this is a Safe Routes to School project. This is pedestrian in nature, of course, with the pedestrian crossing and the signs and the lights, that sort of thing. This was one of our first events, so we were able to preview this for the city and continue to engage residents about the project and give them a preview, and we were able to capture some additional comments that the county and city could use. Next slide, please. So that's my presentation. Thanks again for the opportunity to present, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the webinar.
Thanks so much, Stephen. That was great. So we've heard from an infrastructure, non-infrastructure combination awardee, and a total non-infrastructure awardee. And now we're going to hear from our Cycle 1 plan awardee. So Justin, are you ready to go? Yes.
All right.
All right.
Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Robertson. I'm a planning associate in the city of Glendale, and I'm talking today primarily about the citywide pedestrian plan and the outreach, analysis, and planning we were able to do thanks to ATP Cycle 1. The PED plan, the Cycle 1 funded citywide safety education initiative, and our federally funded Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure program are three interrelated projects under the B Street Smart Glendale banner. Again, today is about the PED plan. Next slide, please. So a little context, regionally, Glendale borders the cities of Burbank, Pasadena, and Los Angeles in LA County. It's an urbanized city of over 200,000 residents who speak many languages, primarily English, Armenian, and Spanish. 70% of our residents speak a language other than English at home. Glendale is also a major retail and jobs center with a vibrant downtown and commercial corridors full of cars and people. Next slide, please. So pedestrian safety in Glendale is historically a challenge. We have sticky pedestrian collision rates year to year, and looking back about a decade, we have consistently about 95 pedestrian collisions per year, and our performance relative to our peers statewide quite poor and compelling when it came time to pursue ATP funds. That said, we have spent millions of dollars on engineering and enforcement and programs over the years trying to address the issue. Clearly, we needed a new approach, and in 2013, the City Council here, the Pedestrian Safety Task Force appointed by the City Council, one of their key recommendations was to develop a pedestrian safety action plan. So between the stats, the clear need for a new approach, and the timing, it was right to pursue ATP Cycle 1 funds to implement that recommendation, and we were awarded $500,000 each for the PED plan and for the Citywide Safety Education Initiative. Another challenge relates to Glendale's diversity of backgrounds and languages, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. So as part of the Safety Education Initiative, we hired a public relations firm with public health experience to develop a brand strategy and message to promote behavior change among all road users, regardless of background. Through public outreach, surveys, and focus groups in 3 languages and across age groups, we learned that different messages resonate differently depending on the receiver's background, suggesting we needed a message and a brand that's as relevant, culturally sensitive, and broadly meaningful as can be. A tall order. Next slide, please. The brand developed for the project, B Street Smart Glendale. It's simple, high contrast, and translates well across languages. The message is, we're all responsible for safe use of the roads, and the strategy involves engaging community partners in these different within the community to help spread the word, supported by outreach events, giveaways, social and traditional media campaigns. And the Kiwanis Club in particular has donated money and volunteer time to sustain the project. All of this is also supported by, next slide please, billboards in high collision corridors with a basic but eye-catching message to share the road. Next slide please. 200 light pole banners in high collision corridors and around schools. These were supported by paid ads in Armenian and Filipino newspapers, TV segments on the city's English language channel and USA Armenia TV, and myriad branded giveaways with the campaign's multilingual brand and message. Next slide, please. We also have a dedicated website. All of our work that I'm talking about today is on bstreetsmartglendale.com, and that's supported through an active Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram social media effort. It's also just one of the ways we're soliciting feedback on, next slide please, the draft citywide pedestrian plan. An effort to review and consolidate the city's various efforts across different departments into a single master plan and to take a data-driven approach to pedestrian policies, programs, and project recommendations to save lives. Next slide, please. The City Council followed up the task force with an advisory committee to oversee this new work that included the Chamber of Commerce, the Local Health Coalition, School District, Police and Fire, Public Health, Los Angeles Metro, SCAG, homeowners associations, Walk by Glendale, and city staff. This advisory committee met monthly for a year and directly informed not just the plan's recommendations, but also our outreach approach. These are the folks that know their community best, and it was key to engage with them early and often. Next slide, please. So we started public outreach right away, initially with a temporary pedestrian wayfinding program near 50 points of interest around town. I'll let that slide stay up a minute. It's a 12-minute walk to the Central Park and the Adult Recreation Center from this point. And there's the hashtag for the campaign, Glendale Walks. And we saw folks tagging themselves using the hashtag Instagramming when they saw this out on their walks. It was pretty great engagement for not a lot of investment there. Next slide, please. They were meant to stay up for a few weeks and come down, but given the materials we used, it's been over a year and they're still up and looking good. That's corrugated plastic and plastic zip ties. I suppose the Southern California weather helps. Next slide, please. One idea for the future is finding a way to make them permanent, though their impermanence made them an easier sell for quick deployment. Next slide, please. We held 4 pop-up events around the city. We engaged folks young and old in an interactive art project that gathered useful data. They were asked to tell us 3 things that would help them walk more in Glendale, with a range of answers tied to particular colors. Over 400 people picked the colored triangles that corresponded to their answers, as you can see in the top center, and placed them in a mosaic on the bottom right. Of the 700+ responses we received to "I would walk more in Glendale if," the #1 answer was by far if vehicles would slow down. Next, please. Plan A was to turn that mosaic pattern into a temporary creative crosswalk once we hit the streets with the draft plan. However, our Public Works Department informed us that removing the semi-temporary materials we had in mind, most likely spray chalk, would have required power washing the asphalt, triggering stormwater issues that we couldn't address within our budget or schedule. While we still plan to implement creative crosswalks in the future, we had to go to Plan B for this project. Next, please. The mosaic instead became a visually striking mural of 3x7 canvas panels. We hung them in a busy pedestrian plaza to announce release of the draft plan and to encourage public comment through our online survey tool. The mural and draft plan went live on October 2nd. By the end of the month, we'd received 85 survey responses online, and at this point, we estimate we have at least 125 responses. Next, please. We also engaged the public and our advisory committee in a series of walk audits, including at night, which, at which time pedestrian conditions can be rather different depending on whether or not a street is well lit. They collected good data and they learned to see their streets with new eyes. And once you learn exactly why streets might feel safe or unsafe, it's hard to unlearn and easy to share with others. Next, please. We participated in Ciclavia, our big regional open streets event, when it came to Glendale. You can see our pole banners on the upper left. Next slide, please. And at that event, we had a pop-up parklet with tables and chairs. Next slide, please. Cornhole, and information about the problem and the project. The public used colored stickers to choose their favorite solutions, and as usual, traffic calming was #1 by far. Next, please. Phase 1 was also about doing our homework on policy and programs, best practices, what the city's already doing, and ways to do better. Next, please. One bright spot. At a city council check-in, one council member asked us to report back with 3 new ped safety ideas. They didn't have to be brand new, just new to Glendale. We came back with 6, including Vision Zero, 20 is plenty, safe routes for seniors, and more. We got to safely explore some of these great ideas that might not have otherwise been part of the discussion. It was a safe place to bring up things like that. Next, please. So, data analysis in the plan started, of course, with SWITRs. This map of collision data suggested that by prioritizing these 17 high collision corridors, which are just 2% of the city's roadway network, we could address 40% of the pedestrian collisions. Next, please. Other analyses included pedestrian demand, walking comfort, ease of crossings. Next, please. We also did new ped counts, inventoried existing pedestrian infrastructure, and did equity and public health analyses. Next, please. Given the scope of the problem, the advisory committee helped us weight our safety, equity, and demand inputs to help us geographically focus our efforts in a way that also reflects the community's values. The darkest blue areas shown are the highest priority tier, and while they're only 4% of Glendale's land area, they capture 78% of pedestrian collisions. Next, please. Another thing we learned is exactly who's getting hit, where, and why. The #1 circumstance is a left turn at a signalized intersection, and #2 in Glendale is a right turn at a signalized intersection, for example. So some solutions for these include eliminating permissive left turns and implementing no right on red where warranted, particularly in the downtown. Next, please. We learned that younger and older people are disproportionately represented in the collision data, which suggests a focus on school areas and neighborhoods with older populations. We also learned that young adults and men are overrepresented among drivers in ped collisions, with implications for our messaging and outreach strategy. Next, please. We broke the engineering solutions into 3 categories, the first being safety corridor projects that can help address common collision types in specific and across similar corridors. Next, please. The second type in the plan is transit connection projects. The plan applies LA Metro's first last mile pathway methodology to identify conceptual improvements around transit hubs, including cost estimates. The plan's third type of projects, Safe Routes to School, were consolidated from existing plans and incorporated into this new pedestrian master plan. Next, please. The plan includes grant-ready packets for 3 priority projects with engineering drawings and specific data that might be asked for on a grant application, including demographics, cost-benefit analysis, and proof of outreach. These are included as an appendix to the draft plan, and they're ready for quick applications once the plan gets adopted, and the timing might be just right for Cycle 4. Next, please. The plan's approach to policy and program recommendations lays out the rationale, the phasing, and the responsibility for each of those in a highly graphical, accessible format. Next, please. Our engineering project recommendations are also phased, and we identify quick wins in the first phase, including signal timing projects, zebra crossings, and pilot to permanent demonstration projects using paint and posts. Next, please. So, the next steps for the plan, the public review draft is online right now at bstreetsmartglendale.com. There's a Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 is taking stock. That's all our homework that we did. And Part 2 is taking steps, which is the meat of the plan, the recommendations, the project list, the data analysis. presentations to community groups that participated in the advisory committee. This constituency that we built up over the past year through their representatives' participation in the group and developing the plan, we're going to start there and include other stakeholders as well that may not have been on the committee, but we understand that they've been past partners in our work or they're going to be important partners moving forward. Those great mural panels we showed you, there's 6 colorful panels and 1 interpretive panel, and it's rather large. It's about 33 feet long. But the good news is we can take those 1 or 2 at a time and take them on a little road show around the city. So a couple of panels may go up at the Central Library, may go in some vacant storefronts that the city has control of, that sort of thing, and otherwise show up at pop-up booths as available to us. And all of that continues until we head to the City Council for adoption in spring 2018. Next, please. And that'll do it. I'll be around for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful, Justin. Thank you so much. So there you have it, folks. We've heard from 3 successful ATP Cycle 1 projects. In this next section of the webinar, we're going to use our remaining time, almost all of our remaining time, for your questions and answers. So again, we're going to be using the chat feature in our in the WebEx system. So go ahead and type in your questions, and we'll disseminate them to our speakers as they come in. We do have a couple that have come in that came in previously. This was actually one for Mark, and it's specific to the use of existing professional trainers that are available through different federally funded and state-funded projects. So this person has asked, did you use the community pedestrian safety training offered by, I believe, California Walks in partnership with UC Berkeley as part of your efforts to inform your ATP application?
Yes, absolutely. We had that training, which was with UC Berkeley, Cal Walks, just about a year or 6 months before the first call for projects, and we used that final report, which I think was really huge in securing our funds, and we're doing something similar on our own now, preparing for Cycle 4 to kind of reevaluate where we are and where we can go moving forward. But I do credit a lot of our success in having that workshop and engaging the community outside of the active call for projects through that workshop.
Perfect, great. And the ATRC can put together the links that will connect those of you that might be interested in future trainings. We can get you that information so that it's something that you can apply for your own community if you haven't already received it. All right, we have a question for Justin, and it's, how did Glendale come up with the pedestrian demand data?
So the pedestrian demand data was, let me pull this up, it was mostly based on land use. So it's about land uses and proximity to uses that are most likely to generate pedestrian trips. So those are retail uses, those are transit stops, schools, employment centers, those sorts of things. Glendale has a rather lively downtown in which we have a good deal of office space and active ground floor retail uses. And so those are places that you can count on pedestrian demand, but we also felt it was important to, include in that consideration other things that folks might walk to, parks, hospitals. We have 2 college campuses, community college campuses, mixed-use projects, and we have a major regional retail center, the Americana at Brand and the Glendale Galleria Mall, our Civic Center, our courthouse. All of those were part of the pedestrian demand index.
Very good. Thank you so much, Justin. We do have a question that came in earlier as well, and this is for all of the awardees, and it's about how are you tracking, and so Justin, it might be a little bit different for you as a plan, but for your projects, how are you collecting data on your outcomes? How is that built into your process? And either Mark or Stephen can begin.
Sure, I'll go ahead first. We are working, like I said, working with the Center for Healthy Communities at CSU Chico, and they are preparing they prepared the pre-survey and the post-survey, and so we're just going through our work plan that was approved by Caltrans Local Assistance and kind of going item by item on what we said we were going to do in the Excel spreadsheet and what we have done and are doing as far as our post-construction data collection. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's our current approach.
Very good. We'll take it. Stephen, do you want to talk about how you've measured outcomes for your non-infrastructure award in the SCAG region?
Sure. It started, the ATP requirements based off of our grant award was essentially just the attendees, the amount of attendees, and the survey results that we conducted. So we have a discussion with the cities up front about their expectations, how many attendees they consider to be a successful event, and we use that as our measuring stick in the metric for success for the event from that component. And we don't count heads, and we don't do a drone, a video, and that sort of thing. It's an estimate based off of just doing some counts throughout the event and forecasting those throughout the event. And then with the surveys, we use the surveys for not only just event success, but also using the surveys to give the city staff some information, data that they can use in moving forward with projects. So, but then just in addition to that, our success for the event is just the city's happy with the event. They see a benefit in it, and we see projects that are applied for and received grant funding that we've had a role in helping that process.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So in Glendale, on our plan, we have not only sort of informal ways of measuring success before, during, and after, but we've got some formal ones as well built into the process. Informally, there's the social media engagement. There's responses to our PED plan surveys and responses at our pop-up activity as well. And we can compare those to past outreach efforts and what our social media folks know to be, a robust engagement. And with the Safety Education Initiative, we've got pre and post surveys, bike and ped counts as well as part of this project. Before and after, of course, there's collision data, and despite the lag with SWITers, there's always the Glendale Police Department that can help fill in the gaps for more recent collision information. And then the plan itself, which I'd encourage everybody to go check out Chapter 7 of the plan, which lays out, the plan has 4 main goals, and to those 4 main goals, we've found 14 indicators to help us monitor our progress over time. And they're all indicators that rely on data that's easy to gather, easy to understand, and straightforward to communicate, not only for us internally, but for the community. So check that out.
Very good. We will check that out. We're going to be sending the link to the plan, Glendale's plan, as part of our follow-up communication to this webinar. I'm looking at our clock and seeing that we are coming close to the end of our 1.5-hour period. So I'd like to take us to the remaining part of our webinar and just go over a couple of key announcements. The first is, and hopefully everyone on the call is already aware, I want to remind everyone that the CTC has been hosting a series of public workshops to ensure statewide participation in the development of the draft guidelines and applications for the ATP Cycle 4. And this slide shows the remaining workshop schedule. You're highly encouraged to participate either in person or via call. There's a website at the bottom of this slide where you can get some more information and the agendas for the upcoming dates. Just be reminded that there will be a call, and it's expected for March 26th, and that should say 2018. I apologize about that typo. Next slide, please. Your feedback today is important. As we do with all of our ATRC webinars, we'll send out an email with a Survey Gizmo link, and that email will be sent out later today. We encourage everyone to complete the short survey and give us feedback about today's training. And also, if you have suggestions for follow-up webinars or need specific assistance on a particular matter, this survey is the place to give that feedback. I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers today for serving as subject matter experts and really helping us to speak to the early ATP achievements. They've also all allowed for their emails to be given as part of this webinar, and if you have any questions that relate to the content that they've shared in this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact any of them. And lastly, we encourage you to contact the Active Transportation Resource with any questions you may have. So you can see we are a small but mighty staff right now, but we are going to be gearing up and adding to our personnel roster very shortly in the new year. We're able to provide you with technical assistance and consultation on safe routes to school and other non-infrastructure components of your active transportation projects. We serve as the point of contact for existing awardees, award seekers, nonprofits, community and parent champions, schools, public works departments, and others. And of course, we're very excited to be able to lend our public health expertise and perspective to facilitate successful non-infrastructure project implementation and evaluation all over the state, and always know that we are here for you. And on that note, I'm going to close us off and thank everyone and wish everyone a great day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, our speakers.
Your conference is ending now. As requested by the host, please hang up.